Right, so housing has been at the forefront of some Labour narratives this last week. Rachel Reeves was speaking to Laura Kuenssberg last Sunday, and the conversation turned to housing. And when asked whether Reeves would spend taxpayers' money, public money as it is better called, because taxes don't pay for stuff, I will keep saying it, the answer was basically no. Of course, she was happy to bleat on about the dream that is home ownership, completely out of step with the fact far too many have no hope of getting on the housing ladder, as overheated as our housing market is. But council housing, social housing, she literally made Laura Kuenssberg come across as left-wing, because on these she didn't want to know. It's not as if there isn't plenty she could attack the Tories over in their failures on this, after the revelation just today that Michael Gove's Department of Housing, Levelling Up and Communities have handed back to the Treasury some £1.9 billion because they couldn't find anything to spend it on. Oh, we're only in a housing crisis. What can a minister spend such sums on? Oh, I know, housing. Social housing, or fixing up housing to get it brought back into use. We have one of the worst housing crises on record at the same time as having the lowest rate of building since the Second World War. Why? So that housing demand remains high, and with it, prices, presumably. Got to make sure all those Tory MP landlords and donors with their property portfolios don't lose money, don't we? Who cares if the proles are homeless? They don't vote for us. Labour could be having a field day over this, but then there are plenty of landlords on their benches too. Reeves had these facts to hand on housing, perhaps not the Tory underspend, but the underinvestment and the need for it, they are quite obviously aware of, and should have been, because it's been an issue for years now. But, you know, fiscal rules. The Tories aren't even in full agreement here either. As much as I can posit about Gove being unable to find projects to spend this vast wad of cash on, he seems to be on a different page to the Chancellor Jeremy Hunt, where the high interest rates affecting people with mortgages have prompted him to say to banks there needs to be more flexibility in how they deal with people at this time. No extra money in it for them, of course, but he's encouraging banks via his new mortgage charter to agree that conversations regarding mortgage repayments with people's lenders wouldn't affect their credit scores, as well as offer temporary 6-month switches to interest-only mortgages, or to extend their mortgage duration, as well as agree 12-month exclusion periods from ordering repossessions. It's bare minimum stuff, really. It doesn't go nearly far enough, but he's caused division within his own party anyway, and with Labour, over the fact he has excluded buy-to-let landlords from this. Oh, won't you think of our poor portfolios? Wail his Tory colleagues. We're anti-landlord now, they whine. Well, good, frankly. Make them sell the property, free it up for people to buy, make more property available. On the bus, though, Damo, hang on, that's a little bit extreme. If buy-to-let landlords are being excluded, then it's people renting them that are in trouble too, as they could end up homeless. You might be thinking that. Well, there's 2 points I'll make to that. One, okay, proof if ever there was any that we need more housing then. Many of these people are probably paying in rent more than they would pay on a mortgage. So how about addressing that issue and help them get a mortgage instead? The other point to make is that any additional costs felt by the mortgage holder on their buy-to-let property will undoubtedly end up passed on to their tenant in higher rents anyway, potentially pricing them out of the property too. So for all the talk of this move by Hunt being anti-landlord, it's actually anti-renter, you can argue as well. But as I said a moment ago, Labour, and by Labour I mean Rachel Reeves again, have come into conflict with this part of Hunt's plan, basically saying, don't worry landlords, we'll save you, and coming down on their side. Now, you can reverse my arguments a moment ago and say Labour are coming down on the side of landlords or tenants, depending on your point of view. But helpfully, Rachel Reeves has set out her reasoning behind this move. A rush to sell buy-to-let properties could have a knock-on effect for a disrupted housing market, she whines. So prices dropping then? God forbid! More housing available? What an awful prospect! Landlords will pass higher costs on to renters, increasing evictions. But they do this anyway. It is also worth reminding Rachel Reeves that investments like buy-to-let properties, but also any other kind of investment, inherently comes with a degree of risk. There is no guarantee of a return, and if the market has got too hot for some, then they need to sell. It shouldn't be government policy, especially not a Labour government policy, to swoop into their rescue when you're doing nothing to help renters stuck having to rent off these people at a level that gives them a return, that isn't taxed as well as wages are either, incidentally. But that's another issue. It's no wonder when Kuenssberg brought up housing for renters that Reeves just deflected, is it? She just doesn't want to know. It isn't important to red Tories like her, even if, just as it isn't important to the blue Tories in power right now. Even if it is really important to ordinary working class people, unable to get housing, unable to get on the housing ladder, unable to find somewhere to rent, left homeless, left sofa surfing, left stuck in B&Bs. They're the people's votes you'll still be wanting, isn't it? Ignore the poor, think of the profiteers. Is that the message you're sending out? Alternatives then, Damo. Let's have a look at some green housing policy then. The Green Party would make affordable and secure accommodation a human right. They recognise those forced into unsuitable housing suffer significant impacts on their lives as a result. It affects their contribution to society if they cannot relax and feel safe and secure. First and foremost, the Greens would bring empty homes back into use, reduce demolition rates, and retrofit, convert, and extend existing buildings, turning them into housing. Right to buy and help to buy would be ended, stopping the loss of social housing, and of new housing targets, 50% of it would be social housing. Local authorities should be given the finance and support to build the social housing they need in their areas. Housing associations should be better democratised, gaining government support in return for giving up their more commercialised natures, which vary from one to another. Rent controls over social housing will be brought in as part of a national rent policy to ensure people pay a fair rate in return for their accommodation. In the private rental market, assured short-hold tenancies would be scrapped and replaced with stable rental tenancies, making properties the home of the tenant first and the landlord's asset second. Section 21 evictions would be abolished. Rent controls would come in at a rate no more than 35% of the median local rate of take-home pay, and local authorities should form private rental authority boards to quickly and cheaply resolve disputes. Greens would introduce a landlord licensing scheme to do away with rogue and slum landlordism. Council tax reform to introduce new higher bands appropriate to larger properties would be brought in as well. There is an absolute shed load of housing policy on the Green Party website, so do fill your boots and go along and have a read of much of the rest of it. It is so much more than what the mainstream parties are offering, or not, as the case may be. Blue Tory or Red Tory, Jeremy Hunt or Michael Gove or Rachel Reeves, there's little prospect of change in the housing, no matter who is in charge of those two parties. Thanks for watching. I hope you found the video useful. Here's another if you fancy sticking around a bit longer, though there are hundreds of others to check out if you prefer something else. But this one is where Rachel Reeves isn't the only one missing the point about what it means to be Labour. So is Wes Streeting, Kel Surprise, who even when offered a puff piece to sell himself still ends up coming across as a total wrong-un. And I'll hopefully see you on the next vid. Cheers, folks.